Those are the only 2 text messages that are cited in the claim for defamation. And interestingly, Steven Crowder is the one that made them public in his claim.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
You know, let's lighten the mood a little bit. There's been a lot talking about the overruling of the Chevron doctrine, talking about people arguing over shrinking fiefdoms. Let's lighten the mood a little bit. So Steven Crowder is a guy famous for getting his shit rocked by an IBEW member in Wisconsin. and then in that situation, he tried to take this guy to court, but then video came out showing that, oh, actually Steven Crowder was the instigator, and he was the person that made the first physical contact. So did not have a case, had to drop the case, and so the IBEW member was his good name was cleared. He is also famous for being a bad boss. He's a terrible boss, actually. Famously a bad boss, despite the fact that he makes all of his employees sign incredibly broad NDAs, non-disparagement agreements. And that is the reason that a labor attorney and friend of the show, Matt Bruenig, has taken Steven Crowder to court over the attempt to enforce this NDA against former employee Jared Monroe, known on the Steven Crowder program as Not Gay Jared. So the case basically was that was not even that Jared was being public with his displeasure in Steven Crowder's in his work for Steven Crowder. It was that Jared Monroe was talking to Steven Crowder's ex-wife during the divorce trial, as his wife was basically trying to make a case, and particularly as it relates to child custody. And Jared Monroe, in a couple of texts, said, we would be willing to testify to a lot of the things that you're saying here under the right circumstances, and blah, 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 blah. And so Steven Crowder says, even though this is a private text message, between 2 friends, that this is a violation of the NDA that you signed with Louder with Crowder. So, and that's where Matt Bruenig came in. He says this NDA is a violation of the National Labor Relations Act. It is overly broad and prohibits and would prohibit workers from engaging in their federally protected right to discuss their working conditions. Interestingly, I talked to Matt Bruenig about this. I talked about all the ins and outs of the case, and it's a really interesting case. I would recommend folks go back and watch that. He explains it really well. But conceivably, you could have an NDA that actually would have prohibited the conversation between Jared Monroe and Hillary, formerly Crowder. You could conceivably craft an NDA that prohibits that communication without violating the National Labor Relations Act. But that was not the case for Steven Crowder's NDA. Steven Crowder's NDA did violate the National Labor Relations Act, and so Matt Bruenig filed an unfair labor practice on that, and the remedy for that, historically, and there's precedent for this, the remedy for that unfair labor practice is to strike the NDA clause in its entirety for all former employees of Steven Crowder. So this is it does not just narrow the scope of the NDA to what would conceivably be legal. It actually strikes it in its entirety, which would free Jared Monroe and incidentally any other former employee of Steven Crowder. And so that's what he did, filed that unfair labor practice in response to Steven Crowder filing a lawsuit against Jared Monroe for a violation of the NDA. Well, after that, there were some people on Twitter that, know nothing about the National Labor Relations Act that were saying, oh, obviously, Steven Crowder's going to win this. Well, Steven Crowder withdrew his lawsuit because Matt Bruenig says it probably became clear that Steven Crowder was going to lose and he was going to have to pay potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars to Jared Monroe in legal expenses, which would be very funny. And so he withdrew that lawsuit, and then he filed another lawsuit that that is just common law, a common law claim for defamation. So not related to any apparent violation of, any non-disparagement. It's just generally, Steven Crowder is alleging that Jared Monroe defamed him in the same way that, Adam could claim that I defamed him, even though we have no non-disparagement agreements between Adam and myself, right? It's just a common law defamation claim.
Hey, 5 seconds. Just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
Based on the following 2 text messages, both from Jared. Here's the first one. Quote, I think there's a scenario where several of us would be willing to attest to all of that. The second one is, I just don't want him anywhere near those kids. That really, really disturbs me. Those are the only 2 text messages that are cited in the claim for defamation. And interestingly, Steven Crowder is the one that made them public in his claim. But so that is not a very good case for defamation. And Matt Bruenig writes about that in NLRB Edge, his publication about, updates around labor law. And you can read his entire article, but he says in NLRB Edge, presumably the idea here is that, presumably the idea of this lawsuit is that because it is a common law claim for defamation, it does not run into the same problems that the first lawsuit did, i.e., it is not a lawsuit that seeks the illegal objective of enforcing contract clauses that violate the National Labor Relations Act. But Matt Bruenig said, this is still mistaken. There are 3 kinds of lawsuits that violate the National Labor Relations Act. Number 1, lawsuits that seek an illegal objective. That's what the former lawsuit was. 2, lawsuits that are preempted, and 3, lawsuits that are baseless and retaliatory. Matt Bruenig says, the breach of contract lawsuit was a lawsuit that sought an illegal objective. This defamation lawsuit is a lawsuit that is baseless and retaliatory. He explains that a lawsuit is considered baseless when, quote, no reasonable litigant could realistically expect success on the merits, unquote. A lawsuit is considered retaliatory when it is brought, quote, with the intent of retaliating against an employee for the exercise of rights protected by Section 7 of the NLRA, unquote. There are at least three reasons that no reasonable litigant could expect to succeed on this defamation claim. Number 1, it clearly runs afoul of the Texas anti-SLAPP statute, the Texas Citizens Participation Act. Number 2, the 2 statements alleged as defamatory are opinions, not fact claims. And number 3, proving defamation against a public figure requires a showing of actual malice, i.e. that Jared knew these statements were false or had reckless disregard as to their falsity. The lawsuit was also brought with the intent of retaliating against Jared for the exercise of his Section 7 rights. This defamation claim is clearly a continuation of the prior legal actions brought by Louderwith Crowder, which explicitly state that Louderwith Crowder is bringing the actions in response to Jared's alleged communication with coworkers about workplace conditions. The defamation lawsuit is also clearly being filed in response to Jared's filing of a ULP charges against Louderwith Crowder for its prior illegal lawsuit. So, although the new lawsuit is not an illegal objective lawsuit, it is a baseless and retaliatory lawsuit, which also violates the NLRA and carries with it the same penalties, including the payment by Louderwith Crowder of Jared's legal expenses. So, in response to this new action by Crowder, I have amended the ULP charges to allege that Louderwith Crowder's defamation lawsuit also violates the NLRA. The NLRB decided a similar case in 2018 that reached that exact conclusion. So there we go. That's the updates. Steven Crowder admitted defeat in battle number 1. He has opened up a new front in the war against Jared Monroe and Matt Bruenig, and Matt Bruenig asserts that he will lose battle number 2. So we will we'll keep you up to date on that. But that's a fun story. That's a fun story. You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free
to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.